Good afternoon and welcome to our last but not least of our talks today. I'm Jamie McCall from PLB. I've been chairing it today. PLB are one of the show sponsors and we're proud to be involved with these talks. If there's any feedback that you've got at all that you can pass on to the Museum and Heritage Show, please email info@museumandheritage.com. There'll be some time for some questions at the end. We'll pass around a mic to do that with. And please remember the session's going to be recorded, so you'll be able to access that online after the show's finished. So to introduce Lending and Borrowing, a partnership approach to making your collections more accessible, we have Suzie Tucker, the Head of Strategy and Communications from the National Museums Directors Council, who's kindly standing in for Catherine, and Dana Andrews, a Professional Development Manager of the Touring Exhibitions Group. So I'll pass over to them.
Hi everyone. Oh, can you hear me okay? Great. I'm Suzie Tucker from the National Museum Directors Council, NMDC. And firstly, just to apologise, but I'm standing in for my colleague Catherine, who has sadly come down with COVID. So apologies that I'm a bit less expert than her and I'll be looking down, reading her notes a bit more than I would normally like. So we're here today to talk about the lending and borrowing principles developed by NMDC and TEG. Just to say, first of all, to those of you who don't know NMDC, we represent the leaders of the UK's national collections and major regional museums. So we've got 47 members, and those members are the directors or CEOs of museums, or, for example, some local authority members are the head of culture or equivalent. All our member museums are either arm's-length bodies supported directly by government in England, Scotland or Northern Ireland, regional museums in England that are formerly Arts Council, major partner museums and Glasgow museums in Scotland, and we've also got associate members, the British Library, National Museum Scotland, National Library Scotland, Kew Gardens, the British Film Institute and the National Archives. And we're funded by our members, and our physical home at the moment is at Tate Britain, where our chair, Maria Balshaw, the director of Tate, is based. So as you can see here, our main purpose is to act as an advocate on behalf of our members, mainly to government, but to other strategic bodies, to act as a voice for members, and to take a lead in setting policy agendas for museums and cultural property. We also provide our members with a forum to discuss issues of common concern and support policy and projects within and across our membership and help them to make change and develop policy within their institutions, which is where this work comes in. NMDC has done a lot of work to support cross-sector partnerships and lending and borrowing, and our members are keen to support the wider sector and make their collections as open as possible to as many people as possible. So what can NMDC do in this area? Because we represent a significant part of the sector and quite a lot of the largest museums in the sector. Many of our members actually have a requirement to support the rest of the sector, whether that's in their role as national museums or in cities and regions where the larger museums often support a much wider network of smaller museums. So although we don't speak for the whole sector, one of the things that we can do, considering the makeup of our membership, is to offer a strong commitment to lending and borrowing and to support ambition in the wider sector. So as you can see here, a few reasons why we think this work is important is to support our own members and to make sure that their collections, including the majority of the national collections, reach as wide an audience as possible. On this particular piece of work, we were already working with TEG, who we work with on lots of different issues. And so this was quite a complementary partnership for us. And there's other various supporting factors, not necessarily why NMDC does this work, but in terms of relevance. For example, responding to recommendations of government reviews. There's the Mendoza Review in 2017, and supporting existing work that the national museums particularly do in partnership around the sector. We've also heard that the sector has asked for it, it says here. That sounds a little bit more aggressive than... Apparently the sector would welcome NMDC focus in this area. So we looked again at what we've done in the past, and in 2003 NMDC published some guidelines for borrowing from national museums. But this was before NMDC membership expanded beyond the national museums to regional museums, so it was very much just a national perspective. So it was felt that it'd be really timely to undertake a new piece of work to look at the wider sector, including all of NMDC's members, including our regional members, and decided to revise and publish new principles. This is just a slide really just to demonstrate all the various things that have been happening in the lead up to this work, various activities and policies that impacted on it. As you can see, there's quite a lot going on. So it wasn't a small task to publish actually new principles, bringing a lot of this stuff together, but also it wasn't happening in isolation from a lot of other similar initiatives. So as well as working with TEG, we've also worked with the Art Fund in support of the Western Loan Fund. And we were also, particularly when this work started in 2017, trying to respond to government expectations and the recommendations from the Mendoza Review, which recommended that national museums should work more in partnership. So we engaged lots of people across the sector through roundtables. We had a session at the MA conference. We convened a working group to help us develop the ideas further. And from this engagement over this period, we heard a lot of the kind of usual complaints about the lending process and a lot of common themes, particularly in relation to borrowing from national museums. And the results of TEG's Lending and Borrowing Experiences survey also demonstrated that we needed to find a way to make the process more transparent and easier. So from that work in, I think it was 2019, the results showed that 33% of museums found it difficult to research and access information about objects to borrow. 50% of organisations weren't publishing information about their loans process online or anywhere else. There's the amount of time that it takes to coordinate a loan varies massively across the sector. It was hard to predict that. It's very difficult to borrow from a national museum, something that we heard repeatedly, and charging policies vary hugely, and understanding fees was difficult. And then perhaps most strikingly, the most common reason for refusing a loan is that the object cannot be lent, and that was true in 53% of all cases. So we realised that we needed to look into this area further, debunk some of the myths around lending and borrowing, standardise things as much as possible, and at least where we couldn't standardise things, create more transparency and really tackle the issue of it being difficult to borrow from a national museum. So that prompted us to draw together a group to develop this set of principles that would be for our members to sign up to, and hopefully that other people in the sector would also sign up to for lending. And in the thinking about that, realised that actually it would also be really useful to outline best practice principles for borrowing as well, the other side of the equation, as of course most of our museums do both. So when we were doing this work, we debated whether to produce an accompanying guide in terms of how to implement principles of lending and borrowing. Lots of other sector organisations work in this area. We're very conscious, but eventually decided that it would be useful to do the two things together. And that's also how the 2003 guide was originally presented. So hopefully you've all seen this document. Sorry, just to go back a bit to say that the reason why this work took so long, obviously there was a pandemic, but we took a couple of years developing through various different initiatives and talking to a lot of people, including TEG and lots of our members and beyond the sector. So the document, I'm assuming that some people have looked at this. If you haven't seen it, it's on our website. It's on the front page of the NMDC website, which is nationalmuseums.org.uk. Please do have a look. We're really keen to always hear any feedback, any thoughts and comments. I won't go through all of the principles now because they're going to come up on later slides. But this document includes the principles, guide to lending and a guide to borrowing, and external links to other sites and lots of guidance. So hopefully it's a really useful working document. And now I'll hand over to Dana.
Thanks, Susie. My name's Dana Andrew, and I'm TEG's Professional Development Manager. And as a freelance consultant, I support museums, galleries, and heritage organisations with their strategies and programmes for temporary and touring exhibitions and international projects. I'm also part-time Executive Director for ICOM UK. So a little bit about TEG. TEG's a non-profit membership organisation dedicated to supporting the cultural sector to develop temporary, touring and partnership exhibitions. We've got approximately 300 members, and as Suzie was saying about NMDC mainly working with the larger museums, TEG really does cater for medium-sized and smaller museums, although we do have a number of the national museums as members. We've also got a growing number of international members. So the Professional Development Programme is a core offer from TEG, and thanks to support from Art Fund, we were able to take this programme online in 2020. And that's enabled us to reach people right across the country. It's meant that instead of in-person workshops where we would have mostly people locally or travelling within a few hours, at workshops we've been online, we've been able to host people from Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, the Southwest, the Northeast, international, all in one workshop, and that's really facilitated conversations and networking. And that networking is really important when we start to think about how potential lending, borrowing and partnership projects might be initiated. So why do we recommend taking a partnership approach to lending and borrowing? Why not keep it simply transactional? So the rich and diverse collections of the UK's museums and galleries really have the opportunity and capacity to inspire, excite, educate and bring people together. And lending and borrowing enables these collections to be accessed and enjoyed by diverse audiences, creating new opportunities for research and interpretation, and promoting collections as a valuable public resource. And as we navigate post-pandemic challenges, lending and borrowing as widely as possible is critical to recovery plans. We need to ensure that as many people as possible across the UK can access the UK's collections and realise their importance. A partnership approach encourages the growth of good lending and borrowing, and we encourage the wider museum community to adopt a clear, helpful and generous approach to lending. And what about some of the benefits of taking a partnership approach? We're all experiencing pressures on capacity and finances, and a partnership approach might really be the only way to continue with ambitious lending and borrowing programs. A partnership approach can also help build longer-term partnerships rather than focusing on one-off projects. It can help build long-term relationships and also maximise the impact for the public and the organisations involved. And these partnerships are really most effective when both parties consider how the other is participating, really collaborating, thinking about each other's objectives, and pragmatically sharing time and resources. So taking the time to understand the process from both sides really does help loans to proceed more smoothly and more effectively. And that's why the Lending and Borrowing Principles and Guide are a really useful resource for the sector. The guide provides advice on best practice for the sector and considering both sides of lending and borrowing. So the Lending and Borrowing Guide does include a couple of case studies. So I wanted to introduce a couple of projects today that are not in there to highlight that there is quite a bit of this partnership approach activity taking place. A relatively simple loan project can enable partners involved to build trust, and any less experienced partners have the opportunity to build their knowledge and confidence when working with national museums or more experienced project partners. We know that building trust and confidence is key to a partnership approach, and it's really essential for developing exhibition projects that might involve co-curating or co-commissioning, for example. So I could have chosen many great examples from across the UK, but I'm going to highlight a couple, one from National Museums Scotland and one from the British Library. So for National Museums Scotland, their Ancient Egypt and East Asia National Programme quite a mouthful. It was funded by the National Lottery Fund through the Heritage Lottery Fund, and it was a 2-year project between NMS and partner museums across Scotland to discover and reveal new and interesting stories about their ancient Egypt, Chinese, Japanese and Korean collections. For example, NMS worked in partnership with museums across Scotland to study ancient Egyptian collections together, and I think that's the key, to better understand ancient Egyptian culture and Scotland's contribution to archaeology. The programme included the touring exhibition Discovering Ancient Egypt and loans to Perth Museum and Art Gallery, the University of Aberdeen, Kilcoodbright Galleries and Dunfermline Carnegie Library and Galleries supported displays of East Asian collections across Scotland. Critically, the project also supported skills development, and the programme provided 99 training experiences to 71 museum staff and volunteers from 25 organisations across Scotland. That's pretty significant. So we can see it was much more than a lending and borrowing project. It was a partnership project that benefited all of the partners involved, had a wide reach and wide-reaching benefits. The collaborative research and project delivery made Egyptian collections in Scotland more accessible to researchers and audiences as a result. There is more information about this project in a short video on the National Museum Scotland website. The second example I want to talk about is the British Library Treasures on Tour. And this programme was generously supported by the Helen Hamlin Trust, and the British Library worked with other libraries, museums and galleries to share their collections across the UK. The British Library opened up their collections by lending important works to all areas of the country, so people could enjoy them closer to home, often in the towns or cities where they were originally discovered or created. So a recent leg on the British Library's Treasures on Tour programme saw the loan of the Bodmin Gospels and a medieval Cornish poem on the Passion of Christ to a new exhibition in Redruth. These manuscripts are on display from October 21 to January 22 at Cresno which is the Cornwall Centre, in an exhibition. And the project to develop Cresno, where the manuscripts are on display, was funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund and Cornwall Council. So we can already start to see how bringing in different partners into a lending and borrowing project can create bigger impact. The Treasures from Medieval Cornwall exhibition followed on from a display the previous summer of 4 early Cornish language play scripts, which were on loan from the Bodleian Library and the National Library of Wales. So by participating in the British Library programme, Cresno had been able to bring significant loans to Cornwall to support and enrich its own collections. Borrowing significant but fragile manuscripts can be quite a challenge. So I'm sure that the experience of borrowing from the Bodleian Library and the National Library of Wales was really great experience in terms of building skills and confidence before borrowing from the British Library. The loans from the British Library were really heavily featured in the marketing of the exhibition and raising the profile of Cresno locally and nationally, and help them draw in new audiences. So to quote the head of culture programmes at the British Library, Conrad Bodman said, "The library's collections are for everyone, and we hope these manuscripts, which are going on display alongside highlights from Cresno archives, will inspire new audiences, young and old. This loan is part of our Treasures on Tour programme, which enables us to open up the library's collections to better serve our communities across the UK." So what's next for lending and borrowing? As Suzie said, the principles and guide are available to download from both the NMDC website and TEG's website. So I'd really encourage you to take a look at those and think about how they might be applicable to your own work and how you might be able to implement some of the principles and guides yourself. I also wanted to highlight TEG's forthcoming Preparing to Borrow workshops, which are happening online in May and June. And these Preparing to Borrow workshops really draw on the principles and the themes of the principles and guides themselves. So the sessions are delivered by TEG trainer, William Brown, National Security Advisor, Carol Warner, Government Indemnity Scheme Manager, Katie Lloyd, who's Grants Manager at Art Fund, will introduce the Western Loan Programme with Art Fund, and Catherine Simpson, who sadly couldn't be here today, will talk about the lending and borrowing principles and guidelines. And it's thanks to Art Fund that we're able to offer these workshops free of charge. The first one in May is fully booked. There are still places available at the June one. And I'd also like to highlight that the Art Fund's Western Loan Programme will be opening again for applications this summer. If you haven't been to see them at the show here, please do. It's a really fantastic opportunity to develop a loan project, and you can apply for funding for things that you can't often apply for under other schemes. And the Western Loan Programme is made possible with support of the Garfield Western Foundation, and the programme aims to encourage new and stronger relationships between regional and national museums and galleries. Art Fund also has a networking hour tomorrow from 10 to 11 in the museum's mix area, so hopefully that's another opportunity where you can talk to them about your lending and borrowing ambitions and whether the Western Loan Programme might be able to support them. So I think that's all we had to say, but I think there's time for questions.
Are there any questions? Would you like to raise your hands at all? No? Nobody? So if we can just put our hands together and say thank you very much to Dana and to Suzie for stepping in at short notice. Well done.